You're trudging through a rain-soaked field in 1347, boots sinking into the mud, armor rusting faster than your good mood, and your stomach growling like a war horn echoing in the distance. You're a soldier in a medieval army, probably regretting every decision that didn't involve staying home milking cows or weaving wool. Arrows whistle through the air, the enemy lurks beyond the hill, and the only thing keeping you going is the faint hope of whatever the camp cook might cobble together tonight. Medieval warfare was an exhausting mess, and feeding an army was a battle as fierce as any cavalry charge. No refrigerators, no supermarkets, no delivery apps. Armies relied on foods that could endure weeks of travel, muddy camps, and the occasional raid on a defenseless village. These dishes, born of sheer necessity, ingenuity, and a touch of desperation, were tough, practical, and surprisingly, many have survived to this day, either in their original form or as the ancestors of modern recipes. So, lace up your metaphorical boots, dodge the catapult stones, and step into the gritty, smoky chaos of medieval camps to explore the foods that kept armies marching, and how you can cook them today without risking scurvy or a mace to the skull. Feeding a medieval army was like balancing on a tightrope while someone pelts you with rotten apples. You had thousands of hungry soldiers, limited supplies, and no way to keep food fresh beyond salting, drying, or praying it didn't turn into a moldy biohazard. Armies relied on a mix of prepared rations, foraged goods, and whatever they could borrow from nearby villagers. Sorry to the peasants left without chickens. The goal was food that was portable, durable, and ideally, not poisonous after weeks in a sack. These constraints shaped a cuisine that was functional, calorie-dense, and, occasionally, even edible. Let's dive into the staples of the medieval soldier's diet and discover how these dishes have survived into modern times, ready for you to recreate in your kitchen without fear of ambush or plague. Bread was the backbone of any military supply, but we're not talking fluffy, Instagram-worthy loaves. This was trench bread, a dense, rock-hard slab made from rye, barley, or whatever grain was available. Baked in portable ovens or on fire-heated stones, it was cheap, filling, and versatile. You could eat it, use it as a plate, or, in a pinch, hurl it as an improvised projectile. The recipe was minimalist. Flour, water, a pinch of salt, and, if the baker was feeling generous, a bit of yeast. After weeks on the march, this bread was so tough you'd need to soak it in broth or ale to avoid cracking a tooth. Its durability made it a lifeline for long campaigns, and soldiers carried it in their packs like modern troops carry combat rations. You can recreate this bread today with minimal effort. Mix rye or whole wheat flour with water and salt, knead a dense dough, and bake it low and slow for a crusty, chewy loaf. It won't win any baking contests, but it'll outlast your Netflix subscription during a power outage. Look for modern peasant breads or dense rye loaves in rural Europe, where ancient baking traditions still linger. Slather some butter on it or dunk it in soup, and you're eating like a medieval soldier, minus the muddy boots and constant threat of an enemy axe. Pottage was the medieval army's one-pot wonder, a thick stew that could be made with whatever was on hand. Picture a dish that says, "Empty the pantry and hope it tastes okay." Barley, oats, peas, turnips, leeks, or foraged wild herbs went into the cauldron, along with a scrap of meat if the army had raided a village or sacrificed an exhausted cow. Cooked over a campfire, pottage was scalable. One pot could feed a dozen or 100 soldiers. It wasn't gourmet, but it was hot, filling, and could be stretched by adding more water or whatever edible plant the cook stumbled across. The recipe changed daily based on supplies, making it the most adaptable dish in the medieval repertoire. To make pottage today, grab barley or lentils, toss in root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, or turnips, and season with thyme, parsley, or whatever herbs you have. Simmer until it's a comforting mush, and you've got a dish not far from what fueled a medieval campaign. Modern lentil soups, vegetable stews, or even Italian minestrone owe a debt to pottage's flexible spirit. It's the kind of food that feels like a hug, assuming your idea of a hug includes a lot of barley and a faint campfire aroma. Preserved meats were a cornerstone for armies on the move. Fresh meat spoiled in days, and dragging cows or pigs through muddy trails wasn't exactly practical. Instead, Soldiers relied on salted pork, dried beef, or smoked sausages. These were the protein bars of the Middle Ages, compact, calorie-packed, and able to last months without becoming a biohazard. Salted pork, sometimes called bacon in historical records, though not the crispy strips we know today, was a favorite. Cured with coarse salt and sometimes herbs like rosemary or bay, it was stored in barrels or wrapped in cloth. Soldiers sliced off chunks to chew on the march or tossed them into pottage for flavor. Dried fish, like cod or herring, was also common, especially for armies near rivers or coasts. You can mimic these meats today with some dedication. Cure a pork shoulder with salt and spices for a few weeks, and you'll have a soldier-worthy ration. If you're short on time, grab beef jerky or smoked salmon from the store. Both are direct descendants of these preserved proteins. Modern charcuterie boards, with their spread of cured hams and sausages, are a polished version of what soldiers dreamed of in lean times. Just don't expect the same vibe eating them in your living room instead of a muddy, smoky camp. Hard cheese was another unsung hero of the medieval diet. Made from cow, goat, or sheep's milk, these dense, salty cheeses were ideal for campaigns. They didn't spoil quickly, provided essential fats and proteins, and could be carried in a pack without turning into a science experiment. Some were so hard they needed soaking in water, wine, or ale to become edible, more to save your teeth than to enhance flavor. Soldiers sliced chunks with their daggers to eat with bread or crumbled them into pottage as a small luxury that made even the bleakest meal feel like a feast. Cheese was a morale booster, a reminder that life wasn't just mud and blood. Modern hard cheeses like aged Gouda, Pecorino Romano, or sharp cheddar are close cousins to these medieval staples. If you're feeling bold, try making a basic farm cheese with milk, rennet, and salt, though it takes patience and practice. The next time you grate Parmesan over pasta, picture a soldier carving a similar chunk with a notched knife, likely grumbling about the lack of ale or endless rain. Cheese's durability and versatility have kept it relevant, whether you're in a medieval castle or a modern apartment. Speaking of ale, beer was the lifeblood of medieval armies, and not just because it helped soldiers forget they might die at dawn. Water was a gamble. Rivers and wells near camps were often contaminated, especially with thousands of unwashed soldiers and their horses leaving a mess. Beer, brewed from barley, oats, or whatever grain was available, was safer thanks to the boiling process that killed bacteria. Plus, it provided calories and hydration, critical for men burning energy swinging swords or hauling carts. Medieval beer was weaker than modern brews, more fondo de pantala, more like a slightly boozy liquid porridge than a craft IPA. Soldiers carried skins or small barrels, and camps often had traveling brewers who could whip up a quick batch using local water and whatever grains were on hand. Wine, rarer and reserved for officers or armies in wine regions like France or Italy, served a similar role when available. You can brew a medieval-style beer at home with malted barley, water, yeast, and herbs for flavor. Skip the hops, which weren't common until later. The result is a cloudy, slightly sour drink that's more food than refreshment. If brewing's not your thing, look for modern Grut beers that use herbs instead of hops, or try a farmhouse ale at a local microbrewery. If you've ever sipped a rustic beer or even something like kombucha, you're closer to what kept medieval soldiers hydrated than you might think. Just don't expect it to pair perfectly with your quinoa salad. Dried fruits, like apples, pears, plums, or figs, were a rare sweet spot in the medieval diet. Lightweight and long-lasting, they were perfect for soldiers on the march, easily tucked into a sack without turning to mush. In southern Europe, especially during the Crusades, armies had access to dates, raisins, or even dried citrus, natural candy thanks to their high sugar and portability. Soldiers munched them as quick snacks during breaks or mixed them into pottage for a sweet twist to break the monotony. Honey, when available, was used to preserve fruits or as a spread for bread, though it was a luxury more common among officers than grunts. These fruits were a lifeline during sieges, when fresh food was a distant dream and hunger loomed. Stock your pantry with dried apricots, raisins, or figs from the store, or dehydrate your own apples for authenticity. Modern trail mixes, with their nuts and dried fruits, are a direct nod to these medieval provisions. For a true throwback, pair raisins with a chunk of hard cheese and a swig of homebrewed ale. You're halfway to a 14th century campaign, but with the perk of no fleas or chafing chainmail. Oats were a staple in Northern Europe, especially in rugged regions like Scotland, Ireland, or Scandinavia, where delicate crops struggled in harsh soil or cold climates. Soldiers carried sacks of oats to make porridge, a quick meal needing only water and a fire. Bland but filling, porridge could be spruced up with foraged herbs, a handful of dried fruit, or rarely, a drizzle of honey if supplies were good. In Scotland, oats were mixed with water and baked into flat cakes called bannocks, the Highland energy bars. These were portable, durable, and could be eaten on the move or during a battle break. Their simplicity and toughness made them a warrior's staple, especially in Celtic regions, well into the early modern era. Make porridge today by boiling oats with water or milk, adding berries, nuts, or maple syrup for a modern twist. For bannocks, mix oats with water, a pinch of salt, and a bit of fat, butter or oil. Then cook on a hot griddle. The result is a chewy, satisfying flatbread, perfect for breakfast, hiking, or a long office day. Modern oat cakes, Scottish porridge, or traditional oat biscuits carry the DNA of these medieval foods, proving simple, sturdy ideas can last centuries. Legumes, peas, beans, lentils, were a cheap, essential fallback for armies. Dried and easy to store, they could be cooked into thick stews, ground into flour for quick breads, or even mashed into a spread during lean times. Dried peas were especially popular, boiled whole for dense soups or ground into coarse flour for dumplings or fire-cooked pancakes. Legumes provided crucial protein when meat was scarce, making them vital for long campaigns, especially in winter or barren lands where fresh supplies were a luxury. The downside? A camp full of soldiers eating beans wasn't exactly fragrant, but survival trumped delicacy. Recreate a medieval legume dish by soaking dried peas or lentils overnight, then simmering with onion, garlic, and herbs like oregano or sage for a rustic flavor. The result is a simple, cheap meal that keeps you full for hours. Modern split pea soup, baked beans, or even hummus, stretching the definition a bit, are direct heirs to these medieval legumes. If you've ever devoured a bowl of chili on game night or dal at an Indian restaurant, you're closer to a medieval soldier's diet than you might think, minus the threat of a prolonged siege. Foraging was a vital skill for medieval armies, not just a last resort. Soldiers were sent to gather wild herbs, berries, roots, or anything that looked edible to stretch rations. Plants like nettles, dandelions, sorrel, or wild garlic were common finds, tossed into pottage or eaten raw in desperate times. Foraging wasn't just for grunts. Commanders relied on it to keep troops fed when supply wagons lagged or provisions ran low. In extreme cases, soldiers turned to tree bark, grass, or even insects, though these were survival measures, not culinary choices. Foraged foods added variety and nutrients, often making the difference between a monotonous diet and outright starvation. Today, foraging is enjoying a renaissance among sustainable foodies and farm-to-table chefs. Channel a medieval soldier by gathering wild herbs like purslane, watercress, or dandelion, always with a reliable guide or app to avoid poisoning yourself. Sauté them with garlic and olive oil or toss into a soup for a medieval side dish. Modern nettle soups, wild herb salads, or foraged plant teas echo these practices. Medieval soldiers were unwitting locavores, eating local because they had no choice. Pancakes, surprisingly, were a battlefield staple. Soldiers carried sacks of flour or ground grains, mixed with water or, if lucky, milk for a quick batter. Cooked on hot stones or metal griddles over a fire, these pancakes were more like crepes or flatbreads than today's fluffy stacks. They were portable, easy to make, and could be stuffed with whatever was around. Cheese, dried fruit, herbs, or even a smear of fat for calories. In some regions, they were called journey cakes, reflecting their role as travel food for long marches. Make medieval pancakes with flour, water, and a pinch of salt, cooked on a hot skillet. Stuff with jam, cheese, or honey for a sweet twist. French crepes, Russian blinis, or American Jonna cakes are direct descendants, showing how a simple idea evolves across cultures and centuries. If you've ever cooked pancakes over a campfire, you're closer to a medieval soldier than you think, minus the risk of an arrow interrupting breakfast. Sieges were a culinary nightmare for both defenders trapped in a castle and attackers camped outside. When supplies dwindled, creativity was a matter of life and death. Stored grains like barley or wheat were ground into flour for dense breads or watery porridge, while preserved meats and dried fruits were rationed with surgical precision. Some castles had small gardens or herbs grown in courtyards, even dovecots or rabbit hutches for fresh meat. In long sieges, people turned to desperate measures: horse meat, rats, cats, or even boiled leather turned into barely edible jelly. Let's stick with the less grim options. Grains and legumes formed the backbone of siege diets, cooked into sparse but nutritious meals to keep people alive until relief arrived or the enemy gave up. Recreate a siege meal with pantry basics. Simmer barley with dried peas and a pinch of herbs like thyme or rosemary, or bake a dense rye loaf to pair with jerky. It's not a five-star dinner, but it's a humbling lesson in surviving on little. Modern preppers, with their stashes of canned beans, dried fruits, and grains, follow the same principles as medieval castle defenders, built to survive a blackout, storm, or hypothetical zombie apocalypse. Victory feasts were a rare treat. After a successful battle or raid, soldiers could eat like kings, or at least minor knights. Fresh meat, a freshly slaughtered sheep or pig, stolen wine, or even exotic spices like pepper, cinnamon, or cloves made all the difference. These feasts were a morale boost, a chance to forget the mud, cold, and constant threat of death. Officers always ate better, with finer cuts, imported wines, or candied fruits, but even grunts could enjoy a decent meal after a good raid, especially if they nabbed a barrel of wine or a merchant's grain sack. For a victory feast at home, roast pork or chicken with herbs like rosemary and garlic, serve with a vegetable pottage, and pair with red wine or a home-brewed ale. For a noble touch, sprinkle cinnamon or nutmeg, spices worth more than gold in the Middle Ages. Modern Christmas or Thanksgiving roasts, with their juicy meats and hearty sides, carry the spirit of these medieval feasts, reminding us that even in war, there were moments to celebrate with a leg of lamb and a bawdy song. Camp cooks were the unsung heroes of any medieval army. Armed with battered pots, questionable ingredients, and a fickle fire, they turned moldy grains, tough meat, and wilted herbs into something vaguely edible. Cooking over an open flame with limited tools was no easy task, but a good cook could work miracles, using salt, wild herbs, or a bit of fat to mask flaws. Some armies had traveling bakers or brewers, setting up portable ovens or fermentation vats in camp to keep troops fed and hydrated. These cooks were as critical as soldiers. An unfed army starts eyeing the commander with mutinous glares. Try cooking like a camp cook with a cast iron pot over a campfire or grill. Use whatever's in your pantry: carrots, lentils, a scrap of bacon, and keep it simple. Bake flatbreads on a hot stone or skillet for authenticity. Modern camping recipes, like foil packet meals or skillet cornbread, echo the ingenuity of medieval cooks who made much from little. It's a fun way to connect with history, though you'll likely appreciate your gas or electric stove when you're done. Religion played a big role in the medieval diet, even in war. The church enforced fasting days, banning meat on Fridays, during Lent, and other holy days. This meant armies had to rely on fish, legumes, or dairy, a logistical headache mid-campaign. Armies near rivers or coasts could use barrels of salted herring or cod, while inland forces leaned on hard cheeses or bean stews. In practice, these rules were often broken. Hard to fast when you're trapped in a besieged castle, but they shaped military provisions. Fasting days sparked creativity, forcing cooks to make the most of non-meat ingredients. Try a fast day meal with baked fish like trout or salmon, paired with a lentil stew seasoned with parsley or dill. It's simple but satisfying, and it would have kept the medieval church happy. Modern Mediterranean diets, with their focus on fish, legumes, and oils, reflect these religious traditions, especially in Catholic countries where meatless Fridays remain a custom. It's a chance to eat simply without worrying about a bishop's wrath or excommunication. The Crusades opened a world of new flavors for European soldiers. In the Holy Land, they encountered exotic ingredients like rice, almonds, citrus, dates, and spices, saffron, cumin, coriander, that were nearly unknown back home. These were rare luxuries, often reserved for officers or used as valuable loot. Rice became a favorite for Crusader armies, light, storable, and perfect for thick pottage to feed many. Spices, worth more than gold, were hoarded or traded. Some ingredients made their way back to Europe, shaping local cuisines and laying the groundwork for dishes we now take for granted. Cook a Crusades-inspired dish with rice, almonds, and a pinch of saffron or cumin, maybe adding raisins for subtle sweetness. It's a simple way to taste the cultural crossroads of the Crusades. Modern dishes like Spanish paella, Indian biryani, or rice pudding have roots in these exchanges, showing how war, despite its brutality, sparked culinary creativity that changed the world. Medieval bread wasn't just food, it was a multi-tool. Beyond being a meal base, soldiers used it as a trencher or edible plate, piling pottage or meat on top. When too hard to bite, they broke it into chunks and soaked it in broth, ale, or water. Some armies carried biscuit bread, double-baked until nearly indestructible, ideal for long campaigns. Mixed flours, rye with wheat, barley with oats, made varied loaves depending on region and season. Make biscuit bread by baking a dense rye or barley loaf, slicing it thin, and baking again until bone dry. It's perfect for survivalists or anyone wanting to feel like a crusading knight. Modern biscotti or German zwieback are distant relatives, though sweeter and less likely to chip a tooth. For authenticity, dunk your biscuit in soup or ale before eating, just like soldiers on the road to Agincourt. Pottage was a blank canvas for medieval cooks. In a good week, it might include fresh cabbage or carrots, wild herbs, or a scrap of pork. In a bad week, it was barely more than boiled grains, maybe with nettles or dandelions to pretend it had nutrition. Cooks got creative, adding wild garlic, mustard, or even ground bark to thicken it. Officers might spice theirs with rare pepper or ginger, a luxury for higher ranks. Pottage's beauty was its adaptability. No matter if you had a whole pig or just a handful of weeds, you could make something edible. Experiment with pottage using different grains and veggies. Barley one day, lentils the next, with celery, leeks, or squash from the fridge. Keep it chunky for rustic authenticity. Modern stews like French cassoulet, British lobscouse, or homemade veggie soup share pottage's spirit, using what's on hand to create something hearty. If you've ever made soup from leftovers to avoid the store, you're channeling a medieval camp cook. Meat preservation was both science and art. Salting pork involved rubbing it with coarse salt, sometimes mixed with thyme or rosemary, and curing it for weeks. Drying beef or venison meant hanging strips in the sun or over a smoky fire, creating tough, protein-rich jerky. Smoked sausages required proper equipment but were prized for flavor and longevity. Soldiers traded chunks of these meats for camp favors, like a spot by the fire or a swig of wine. Make jerky by marinating beef strips with salt and spices, then drying in a low oven or dehydrator. Modern charcuterie like chorizo, salami, or prosciutto are refined versions of these techniques, born from the need to preserve food for uncertain times. Next time you slice prosciutto, think of soldiers cutting salted pork with a dagger, dreaming of a better meal. Cheese making varied by region. Northern Europe favored hard cow's milk cheeses, aged into rock-like durability. In warmer southern regions, goat or sheep cheeses were pressed into compact wheels. Some were so pungent they could double as psychological weapons. Soldiers wrapped them in waxed cloth or stored them in wooden boxes, slicing with daggers or breaking by hand. Seek out aged cheeses like Parmesan, Manchego, or extra sharp cheddar for a medieval vibe. Try making a simple farm cheese with milk, vinegar, or rennet. It won't last like medieval cheese but gives you the idea. Pair a chunk of hard cheese with dense bread and dried fruit for a meal a soldier would have called a luxury. Modern cheeses like Gruyere or Pecorino Sardo carry this legacy, especially with a glass of wine. Beer was a survival tool. Brewers used whatever grains, barley, oats, wheat, millet, and fermented with wild yeast or old bread, creating a cloudy, low-alcohol drink more like a nutritious shake than a modern IPA. Small beer was weaker, designed to hydrate without inebriating. Brewers could produce a batch in a day or two, crucial for camp morale and health. Brew a medieval beer with malted barley, water, yeast, and herbs like yarrow or heather. Hops came later. It takes patience, but it's a taste of history. Try Grut beers or historical recreations for a similar flavor. If you've had a farmhouse ale, you're sipping something close to what medieval soldiers drank, without the risk of river water. Dried fruits were a portable luxury. Apples and pears were sliced and sun-dried. Figs and dates were southern staples. Crusaders discovered dried citrus, which helped prevent scurvy, though they didn't know why. Honey preserved fruits or served as a spread, mostly for officers. Stock up on dried apricots, prunes, or figs, or dehydrate your own. Modern trail mix is a medieval throwback. Try honey-preserved fruit with cinnamon or cloves for a noble treat. Eating raisins or dates connects you to soldiers who savored these treats to break the monotony. Oats ruled Northern Europe's harsh climates. Porridge was a quick fix, improved with wild herbs, berries, or rare honey. Scottish bannocks, flat oatcakes baked in ashes or on griddles, were portable energy bars, perfect for warriors on the move. Make bannocks with oats, water, salt, and a bit of fat, cooked on a griddle. They're great for camping. Modern oatcakes and porridge carry their legacy, proving oats outlast wars and fads. Legumes were a lifesaver when meat was scarce. Dried peas were ground into flour for quick breads or boiled into thick soups. Lentils and beans became stews, spreads, or proto-falafel patties, providing protein in lean times. Simmer lentils or peas with garlic and herbs for a medieval meal. Modern hummus, baked beans, or dal are their descendants, humble foods that don't need luxury. Foraging was a core strategy. Soldiers gathered sorrel, watercress, or wild carrots, tossing them into pottage or eating raw in desperation. Even commanders relied on foraging to stretch supplies during sieges. Forage wild herbs like dandelion or purslane, with a guide to avoid toxins, and sauté with garlic. Modern nettle soups or wild herb salads echo these practices. Medieval soldiers were the original locavores, eating local out of necessity. Pancakes were a battlefield quick fix. Flour and water batter cooked on hot stones or swords. Yes, really. Made thin, flexible flatbreads, stuffed with cheese, herbs, or fat for calories. Make them with flour, water, and salt on a hot skillet. Stuff with jam or cheese. Crepes, injera, or doses share their functional simplicity, evolved over centuries. Sieges demanded ingenuity. Stored grains made watery porridge. Preserved meats and fruits were rationed. Castles with gardens or rabbit hutches had an edge, but desperation led to eating horses or worse. Cook a siege meal with barley, dried peas, and herbs. Modern survival foods like canned beans mirror these tactics, ready for any crisis. Victory feasts meant fresh meat, stolen wine, and rare spices like cinnamon, worth more than gold. Even grunts could feast after a good raid. Roast meat with herbs, serve with pottage and spiced wine. Modern holiday roasts echo these rare celebrations. Camp cooks were miracle workers, turning moldy grains and tough meat into meals with battered pots and wild herbs. Traveling bakers and brewers kept armies going. Cook a stew over a campfire with whatever's on hand. Modern camping recipes like foil meals owe a debt to these cooks. Religion enforced meatless days, forcing reliance on fish, legumes, or dairy. Coastal armies had salted fish. Inland forces used cheese or beans. Bake fish with a lentil stew for a fast day meal. Mediterranean fish dishes and vegetarian stews reflect these traditions. The Crusades introduced rice, almonds, and spices to Europeans. Rice pottage fed armies. Spices were officer luxuries. Cook rice with almonds, raisins, and saffron for a Crusader dish. Paella and pilaf trace back to these exchanges. These foods were resilience. Soldiers and cooks made miracles from little, creating enduring dishes. That we still eat bread, pottage, and cheese shows their power. Recreate them without looting, and be glad you're not eating on a battlefield.